So they should do like on the news stations where they.
Okay.
I think we're on.
Thank you all for joining us for this second in a series of Google Hangouts that we're doing for the film War for the Web. Today we have the great privilege of having Susan Crawford with us to talk a little bit about what she's up to and talk a little bit about her interest in the film. Now, Susan is a professor at the Benjamin N. Cardoso School of Law and a fellow at the Roosevelt Institute and a co-director of the Berkman Center. She's the author of Captive Audience, The Telecom Industry, Monopoly Power in the New Gilded Age, and she's a contributor to Bloomberg View and Wired. She serves as special assistant. She served as special assistant to the President for Science, Technology, and Innovation in 2009, and co-led the FCC transition between the Bush and Obama administrations. And she's a member of Mayor Michael Bloomberg's Advisory Council on Technology and Innovation. Susan, thanks for joining us today.
They should do like at the news stations where they.
Great to be here.
Thank you all for joining us for this. Yeah. Okay. Exit the window. Okay. Okay.
So, Susan, thanks again for coming.
Sure.
Daniel, did you?
Sure.
So I'm here with Ben Caspi and myself. Ben is one of the producers on the film. He's been with us from pretty early on, and I am writing and helping produce the film War for the Web, which is about the internet and the future of the internet in the United States and the decisions and conflicts happening right now that will influence the internet moving forward. Susan, I guess I just wanted to start off with maybe just ask you a couple of questions, like about your book. You know, what inspired you to take on this topic, and what inspired you, like what inspired the title of the book, I guess, and yeah. So let's start there.
What inspired the title of the book? You want to start there?
Let's start with the title, and then from there,
Okay.
The subject matter more general.
Well, it's a great title.
It is
Captive Audience. It just seemed to me. I was talking a lot to my friend Ron Suskind, who wrote The Confidence Men, Price of Loyalty. He's a great man with great titles. And we were both up at Harvard. I was teaching at the time at the Kennedy School and the law school. And I was going to call the thing The Big Squeeze. And Ron actually said, no, it's got to be Captive Audience. So it's his idea. But it's all about the power of very few actors to determine the content of everything we see and learn. You know, everything, absolutely everything. So Time Warner Cable and Comcast controlling a lot of the wired market for high-speed internet access in America, and then a totally separate wireless market dominated by AT&T and Verizon. And I didn't think too many Americans really knew about this, and I'd been in this very privileged position really watching the players in Washington and getting to know everybody. And it seemed to me that life is short and it's important to get in the way, and that it was a very important social policy story to explain to everybody. I care a lot about the internet. I was lucky enough to serve on the ICANN board that handles .com, .net, and .org, and the idea of the internet is the most important idea in my lifetime. And I think it's the most important thing that's happened in my lifetime, its advent. So I wanted to make sure that everybody understood how grave the threats were to the future of the internet in the United States. And now I'm understanding that those threats are also grave in other countries. So I've talked enough, but that's where it all came from.
Well, I guess just to follow up a piece of that, one thing you mentioned is how, this monopoly on the wired and wireless networks use the word content, and that to me is a really important word in this whole debate. I guess, I think a lot of people would acknowledge that they only have one internet service provider, but don't necessarily see the connection between that and a limited access to content. I think most people assume that when they access the internet, they're accessing everything. And I wanted to find out from you, is that the case? If that's the case now, is it a concern that that will go away in the future? How does the monopoly structure of the marketplace impact the content marketplace, or how does it have the potential to?
Well, it's a pretty brutal story, and actually it's about to get a lot worse. That especially on the wired side, every actor involved has a deep conflict of interest. They're not only selling data access, but they're also selling their own TV packages. And so they have not only the incentive, but also the ability to squeeze the networks that try to connect with them. So this may be a new issue to some people. We think of having concerns about, fast lanes and slow lanes coming towards end users of the internet, but it's actually much deeper than that and really invisible to consumers. That because Comcast is so powerful and has, any content network trying to reach Comcast subscribers has to go through Comcast Gateway at the outset of its network. And so Comcast can just raise the gates and say, sorry, War for the Web, we want your network, the one that's connecting to us, let's call it Cogent or Level 3 or some other interconnecting network, we want them to pay us for the privilege of reaching our subscribers. And so that may be easy for Netflix or Google to do. They're very big. But for the next generation of players and for competing services of all kinds, from telemedicine to home security to information-based services, they're going to have to pay for the privilege of reaching Comcast subscribers in the same manner that Comcast's own content will reach those same subscribers. So that's really deep stuff. We assume that the telephone, all these communications networks, just carry our stuff from point A to point B. But in fact, the way this system exists right now, they have a lot of power and the incentive to squeeze the networks as they connect to them, and then to make a lot of choices among winners and losers about content as it reaches Americans. So huge problems for the future of very high capacity services online.
Yeah, I guess it seems to me that there have been some pretty visible fights in the last couple of years. I know that Level 3 and Comcast and Netflix have been going back and forth with the FCC. They did in 2009, I believe, and I'm sure they still are to a degree.
Yeah, but right now the FCC has no authority over any of this.
Right, so why is that? I mean, how did that happen, and is that a change? I mean, my understanding is Brand X and Michael Powell and the reclassification, is that an accurate assessment? I mean, is that an accurate place to start with that, or is it deeper than that?
Well, that's a shorthand way of telling the story. You're not wrong. What happened was 10 years ago, Michael Powell, then the chairman of the FCC, and other people around him believed that competition would protect Americans, that DSL would battle it out with cable and wireless would battle it out with satellite, and we'd have all these different ways of getting online, and so as a result, consumers would be protected. We'd have lots of competition and lots of choices for internet access. As it turned out, Powell then deregulated the entire sector, so there's no set of rules over anything to do with high-speed internet access. And at the same time, there was enormous consolidation. So the cable guys all combined, divided up their markets. They never compete with each other. And wireless turns out not to be a substitute for what's possible over a cable wire. DSL, the phone company's product, turns out nowhere near to be a substitute for what's possible over cable wire. So cable has won. The rest of these actors have backed away from attempting to provide wired high-speed internet access to America, and the cable guys have regional monopolies that they're exercising in this country. So yes, long story short, we deregulated thinking that competition would do the job. It then turns out that where consolidation is possible, competition is impossible. So we saw enormous consolidation. They divided up all the markets, and now cable just has a lock, and the nation has no upgrade path for fiber, which is a much better technology for high-speed internet access, because these guys have no incentive to upgrade their networks to fiber, and they're under no oversight incentive from the FCC or anybody else to do any upgrades. So it's a pretty grave situation.
That actually brings us to a question that was posted on the site,
Okay.
talking about Google Fiber and the Google Fiber project in Kansas City. And his question from Richard was, how do we get fiber-style gigabit internet to the remaining 100 million homes in the U.S.? What can we do as citizens to, in a way, demand that we have gigabit access?
Absolutely. It was a very important question. So Google Fiber is going to cover, as it's currently planned, about 0.5% of Americans. There are also a number of cities trying to do this for themselves. Chattanooga just announced that it's going to be bringing gigabit fiber to every one of its citizens, really jumping ahead of the Google Fiber project in Kansas City, for $70 a month, gigabit access. But these are pretty niche products, and they're not covering all of America. What has to happen is political organizing, and particularly at the level of helping mayors have the political will and air cover that they need to take on the existing internet access companies and make sure that their citizens have fiber access to their homes. I go to lots of meetings of mayors talking about this. It's a very big issue for them. It's pretty clear nothing's going to happen at the federal level for a little while now. So the first thing to do is to organize at the city level and form meetups, vote on this basis, make sure that the mayor understands that this is a very important issue for you. You should hear the mayor of Chattanooga talk about this. He says it's the most important thing that's ever happened to Chattanooga. And he's just determined to make his city famous and make it the best possible place for innovation.
So I guess two quick kind of follow-ups to that. One, is there a place where audience members or viewers can go to find out more about those meetups, about those campaigns, I guess, for lack of a better word? And
yeah, not at the moment. There's, what there is a wonderful site called muninetworks.org, which gathers all the stories of what's going on with these municipal networks. So that's terrific, and there's a lot to learn there. No, there's a need for individuals to kick off those meetups in every single congressional district. So I'm happy to talk about it, but I'm not going to be able to lead the push for each one. But you guys can, so get them going. You could have launch parties for the movie in each district and include in that a meetup devoted towards getting fiber access in that community. I challenge it.
Yeah, it's a good idea. The second thing I was going to ask is, you mentioned innovation. What, because when we went and interviewed a lot of people who are in the telecom industry, and most notably, I would say, Ben, what was the name of that organization? The Rob Atkinson's president of
ITIF, I believe.
ITIF. So their response was always, well, we don't want to overbuild. We don't want to build ahead of the need. So I guess, what's your response to that? What?
Well, my grandmother, born in 1904, always called the electrical bill, the light bill, because from her perspective, the only thing that electricity was good for at the outset was just street lights. In fact, even domestic lighting took a long time to take off with electricity. We don't know exactly what this network is going to be used for, but we know that other countries are really heading in this direction. China is making sure that every single home is ready for fiber. It's already happened in Japan and South Korea, and New Zealand has a very adventurous fiber network. So we led the first generation of internet innovation. We're not going to be leading the second unless we have enough capacity to be the sandbox, be the experimental place where new things are built. Yesterday I was in Cleveland, where there's a tremendous fiber network connecting all of the medical establishment in Cleveland, all of the libraries, all of the public schools, and they're seeing all kinds of exciting things happening, putting Cleveland on the map as the hot fiber city, at least through these public institutions. So we would want the entire country to be like that, not just Cleveland, not just Chattanooga, not just Kansas City.
What kind of innovations are we seeing in those places that already have it? If there are any specific, you mentioned telemedicine before. What are the implications of that?
Well, here's a great idea coming from the Netherlands. The pension funds there are going to fund 3 fibers into every home, one of which will be dedicated to wellness. So it's in the pension fund's interest to keep people healthy so they don't have to pay out enormous amounts in health costs and insurance. So an enormous innovation to let people stay in place, stay at home. They can be visited on their, by their friendly neighbors on their bicycles. And then when it's time to visit a doctor, just flick on your fiber connection and go see that doctor without incurring the enormous cost of a hospital visit. Healthcare is about the most expensive thing the United States has, facing it. Trillions of dollars in expense. We're the most expensive country for all this. And if we could do the same kind of thing, see, what a fiber connection makes possible is presence. You're actually there with the doctor instead of watching some, lumpy, jittery video thing the way we are tonight. And so that's, from my perspective, that in telemedicine is going to happen in another country and should happen here. Another exciting thing going on in Cleveland is the development of simulation labs for very high-stakes surgery. So if a doctor's about to go in and perform surgery on someone's brain, wouldn't it be a good idea if he practiced first? And a fiber network allows the shipping around of all of the data that's needed to realistically simulate that context and allow the doctor to practice. So, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There in medicine, there are lots of other things that can happen in education, in anything that requires a lot of data and presence. Running a business from 4 corners of the country without even thinking about connectivity would be a huge advance.
Yeah,
We're actually joined tonight by 2 fans of the film. We have Catherine and Jamie, and I want to see if either of them want to jump in with a question for Susan.
Ben, real quick, before you do that, I just wanted to mention one thing. Yeah, Susan, one thing, we actually went to Arizona and interviewed some folks on the Navajo reservation there, and one of them was a small business owner, and one of the things that he said is, he has very little ability to conduct daily business because so much of it depends on the internet, and their internet there is so slow. So that definitely resonates with me, and I know with him. He's a fashion designer, and just passing images back and forth for use and to send designs to production houses and stuff is a real challenge for him. And it struck me too when you were talking that rural medicine in this country, in sort of poor areas, one of the biggest expenses that I've heard about for people seeking preventative care and seeking care in general is the cost of traveling to the doctor. If you live in the wilds of North Dakota or South Dakota, it takes a long time to get to the clinic, and this, as you mentioned, this is something that could really go a long way towards lowering that particular cost, and subsequently helping people improve their investment in preventive medicine. Anyway, sorry, Ben, why don't you go ahead with the audience?
Yeah, so I want to sort of throw this to either Catherine or Jamie, if any of you want to jump in with a question for Susan.
Oh, go ahead, Catherine.
Hi, Susan. I'm Catherine. I'm a technologist here in Silicon Valley. And my question is, so what are the unique problems that the American wireless industry faces compared to other countries?
Wireless. Well, actually, on the wireless side, we've got a more competitive market, and we have more 4G subscribers than any other country. But wireless is just the end of a wire, and as you know, and wireless access is really expensive in this country. So technically we're not having a problem. In terms of expense, it is quite expensive, and the usage caps right now on wireless in America make it really cost prohibitive to do over a wireless device the kind of exciting stuff we're talking about on the wired side. So all the health applications, education, any high-capacity video stuff, if you start doing that using a wireless device and going through your wireless carrier, you're going to hit usage caps, which will make your use extraordinarily expensive. So from my perspective, the problem on the wireless side is Americans' perception that it's a substitute for a wire, because it's not. It can't be, just because of the laws of physics. You're not going to be able to carry the same amount of information through the air subject to an interference that you can get through that glass tube, the fiber optic tube with the lasers. So there's a lot of confusion and muddle about this, but wireless is just a different market. In that market, it is too expensive, but we're seeing more competition on the wireless side in America than we are on the wired side. But here's the really unholy thing, is that they're all in cahoots. So Verizon and Comcast and Time Warner have made a deal to jointly market their services, and that means that Verizon's not going to be expanding its wired fiber product, Fios, anymore. And that's a real problem for the country.
You know, Susan, when we were in early development on this project,
Yeah.
We came across your article in the New York Times talking about the digital divide.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we've uncovered when we were going through this film was that those who can't afford wireline service typically have some sort of wireless service, whether it's through a cell phone or a smartphone device. Are they comparable, or can you get by with a wireless smartphone or PDA device?
Well, I think it's a telling fact that 83% of people with smartphones also have a wired home. So if you can afford it, you have both. And it's not comparable for these expense reasons that I've just suggested, that if you try to educate your kids using just a smartphone, they're not going to be able to do their homework on that smartphone very easily. They're not going to be able to participate in class over that wireless device because of these usage cap issues. And they're going to be a distinct disadvantage when it comes to all of the new stuff that you can do that involves actual text input. You know, a smartphone is just awful for interaction by anything other than just passive, listening, absorbing. To produce things, you need a wired connection. It's just indisputable. And I don't know of any business that wants to launch using just a smartphone. That would be really hard.
One other thing that we've heard from a variety of infrastructure builders in the U.S. in New York that we've spoken to is that actually something like only a third of, so we have 4G. There's been a really big 4G rollout in the U.S. For wireless service, and as you mentioned, though, wireless is just the end of the wire.
Yeah.
But a lot of those wires, a lot of the 4G towers have old copper going to them, and so even though it's 4G service from a wireless perspective, it's not really as fast as it could be, or as it should be, or as it's advertised, because the cable going from the actual tower to the internet as a whole is old and slow. And that's just another interesting thing that I remember hearing from Hunter Newby and several others.
Yeah, I mean, the really big picture here is that for both of these markets, wired and wireless, they've made their investments. They're not subject to any competition, so they're not going to be installing more fiber to those towers unless they absolutely have to. Their capital expenditures as a percentage of their revenue for all of these companies are down in the low 12 to 14% range. So they're harvesting. They're making lots and lots and lots of money and not plowing that because they don't have to back into their network.
Jamie, you looked like you had a question for Susan.
Yeah. Oh yeah, earlier, I'm actually from the Cleveland area, so I'm very familiar with the Cleveland Clinic. Right on. But I was just wondering whether you think that the reason that certain cities like that are taking advantage of the internet is just because of their healthcare, like the healthcare institutions there, or is it like another reason you think?
I'm so glad you asked that question because it's all about leadership. It's all about individuals in those cities who decided this was important. So there's a guy, Lev Gonik, there in Cleveland, who's fantastic, who was the CIO of Case Western. And a year and a half after he got to Case Western, 10 years ago, he said, oh, we need this. I need to form a nonprofit that's going to serve the entire medical community and all the libraries and all the schools. Let's just do it. And he did it. So, no, it wasn't because you happen to have this huge medical establishment in Cleveland. It was because there was someone there who thought this had to happen and just got it done. And because in Ohio, someone's going to mention this, so I want to, there isn't a law blocking Cleveland from doing this. Somebody, an organization tried to pass such a law in about 2003 when Lev was just getting going, and they blocked it in the legislature. And so, as a result, all over Ohio, there are a bunch of municipal networks. In 19 states, it's either difficult or impossible for cities to do this for themselves. So, when you take on this leadership, which you're going to do, what you have to do is roll back all of these state laws and make sure that any city can do this for themselves.
You know, one of the topics that's been written on lately is that it's not necessarily a lack of trying from the cable companies or telco companies. It's existing right-of-way laws in municipalities. Would you feel that that argument holds water?
Well, it's a little circular because what happened was the FCC deregulated all this stuff, and so that meant that people just selling internet access are called information services providers, so they don't have poll rights in cities because they're not selling telecommunications. All the FCC has to do to fix this situation is call internet service providers video providers, and a lot of them they're selling TV packages, and then they'll get poll rights. Yeah, again, this is another area of confusion where people say, oh, it's all a problem from local regulators are keeping new fiber systems from being built, and that's not true. The FCC could do a lot to fix the situation.
Do you think
looking at the FCC right now, there's the current case with Verizon versus the FCC. Do you want to give us a little background on that case, and where do you feel that case is going to end up, and what do you think the impact of it will be?
Well, this case arises out of this fundamental difficulty of the FCC deregulating with one hand while pretending to regulate a little bit with the other. And so back in 2007, Comcast was messing around with reset packages and packets online and blocking BitTorrent sessions as a result. And the FCC at the time said, oh, you can't do that, and asserted that it had the power, although to deregulated high-speed internet access, to keep the cable company from doing that. Fast forward, Verizon has now sued the FCC over the December 2010 open internet rules adopted by the FCC, saying, look, you can't do this. You can't deregulate with one hand and then claim to have authority to regulate with the other. There was an argument on Monday, September 9th, before the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals about this case, and it's very apparent that the federal judges there are very skeptical of the FCC's claim to have authority while also deregulating. Again, there's an easy fix to this, and I wrote a column in Bloomberg View about this yesterday, that the FCC just has to reclaim the regulatory ideal and relabel these services telecommunication services, which then gives it the authority, very clear authority it needs, gets rid of Verizon's argument that it's just like the New York Times, that it retains the power to edit everything going over its lines, and puts the FCC on a sure footing into the future. It also fixes that poll rights issue I mentioned. So all of this is possible. It just takes leadership at the FCC, and I have a feeling that that D.C. Circuit argument will prove to be a turning point for this somewhat complicated question.
So are there additional hurdles from the FCC to reclassify the internet, or is it just lack of willpower?
Well, let's be really clear. It's internet access, because on the other side they'll say, oh, you're trying to regulate the internet. We're not trying to regulate the internet. We're trying to make sure that the on-ramps, the highway for the internet, is overseen by some authority so that consumers don't get gouged and new guys like you get protected. The obstacles are not many. The FCC just has to have a good reason to reclassify. That's the legal standard. They have to go back, build a record saying that consumers really perceive this as a transport system, as a neutral network that gets their stuff from point A to point B. And then they have to declare that this stuff is reclassified. The real obstacle is political, that it would be World War III from the carrier's perspective for the FCC to take this step. And I'm hopeful that the new FCC chairman has enough of a backbone that he will just soldier on through that.
I mean, to follow that up, it'll be World War III. How long do you think that? I mean, they can tie it up with court cases, I would imagine. They can file lawsuits. Is that really all that's in their arsenal in this regard, or what?
Well, that's pretty powerful, but that's what they have. They can also march on Capitol Hill and gut the FCC's budget. It's sort of they can make the appropriators say that the FCC shall not spend any money in connection with this sort of issue, which would really destroy the ability of the FCC to do anything. They can make life very unpleasant for the FCC on the Hill, make senators and congressmen call lots of hearings, haul them up before representatives. But just last week, the industry really overstepped. The main lobbyist for AT&T made a big speech saying that he thought that competition policy, when it comes to telecommunications, should reside under antitrust law at the FTC and the DOJ and not at the FCC. And it's so clear that what he's trying to do is just gut the FCC's power. And we've always had an agency protecting Americans when it comes to basic communications networks, and it can't be that it has no authority to enter in this age of the internet. So I'm hopeful that this is like a sopa pipa moment, that the AT&T guy really has overstepped, and it gives us a chance to talk about the reasons why we need an FCC at all.
Yeah. We've been talking a lot about the issues in the U.S. and the fight for in the U.S. going on over telecom and cable issues. Susan, have you been following what's going on with Canada and the telcos over there fighting the American cable company and wireless trying to enter their market?
Not as closely. I'm aware that they went through a big usage cap scuffle a couple of years ago. I'm aware that Verizon has decided not to enter the Canadian market. Verizon doesn't need to. What it's going to be doing instead is acquiring European properties. There's going to be enormous consolidation in Europe because the European PAN regulator there has just yesterday announced that she's all for consolidation. They want to see the same thing happen in Europe that is happening in the United States, which is to have a few very large, powerful players. The reason Europe wants to do this is to lower mobile roaming rates, which are pretty miserable over there. And you move from one country to another using a cell phone, you end up paying a whole lot of money just to shift roaming carriers. But in exchange for fixing that problem, they're giving up on absolutely everything else. So Verizon will now have a lot of power to go and acquire properties over there. AT&T is also interested in doing that.
Just a follow-up question to that, I guess. So because, I mean, Europe, it seems like, from an outsider's perspective, has a pretty different regulatory environment than the U.S., and especially from a political perspective. Is that not true? And if it is true, will that help alleviate the problems of a single carrier or a few single carriers, or is that...
No, in fact, they're really becoming much more similar to us. This is a big document just released a couple days ago, and it purports to protect net neutrality while at the same time saying special deals with content providers are just fine, and weird interconnection arrangements where you force other networks to pay to connect with you, that's just fine too, and consolidation is fine. So no, actually, it looks as if they're following us. They're going down this path that we have trod.
Huh. That's unfortunate to hear.
Yeah, it is. It is. I think a country that's done it right, as far as I can tell, there are a couple examples. I think Japan and New Zealand are both, and Sweden and a couple of the Northern European countries have really done a better job on this. So in Japan, there is a wholesale provider of fiber, NTT West and NTT East, and then there's a lot of retail competition on top of that. And they keep the wholesale guys honest by having two of them so they can compare pricing and set benchmarks that keep that input price really low. And that was really smart. Same thing happened in Seoul, in South Korea, and New Zealand's going through that same exercise. But for whatever reason, we in the United States seem incapable of doing that so far. I'm hoping we'll get more enlightened. I'm always optimistic.
I admire your optimism. Yeah, we had the good fortune of interviewing a guy named Jim Pickrell in California, who was founder and president of the company Brand X, which was the company that I think was at least the named party in the lawsuit against the FCC in 2003. And he talked a lot about the disappearance of the rate schedule and the sudden kind of volume pricing and stuff that started to happen as soon as that FCC decision took place, reclassifying.
Absolutely, right.
And how that basically destroyed his business. I mean, Brand X still exists. They're treading water. They don't really offer new service to anyone because it doesn't make sense from that. It can't keep the business running. Their costs are too high. But he had a lot of interesting things to say about it. I was going to follow up on an earlier. We had the good fortune of talking to some folks in New York City who are working really hard to start ISPs, and one of the things that they mentioned, and I thought this was really funny, so I wanted to kind of share it, is that they're having trouble even. The city is really behind like fiber. The Bloomberg administration is pro-fiber in New York to a degree, but Empire City Subway, which owns all the conduits beneath the city streets, has made it really difficult for new players in the market, and the city doesn't even know how to deal with them. And I thought that was that's another kind of stepping stone or hurdle for these small new ISPs to get over. And we think of New York as one of the kind of more economically competitive markets in the country, just because there's so many people, it's so dense. But it was really crazy for me to hear about those kinds of challenges firsthand.
Yeah, and I'm very familiar with all that, and it's a bad situation in New York. I think that other cities in America will leapfrog over New York when it comes to high-speed internet access. It's not a good picture. And we also saw a report just last week that showed that in the outer boroughs, so ECS, the thing you're talking about, only covers Manhattan and the Bronx,
right.
And in Brooklyn and Queens and Staten Island, if you're in a public school there, it's very likely that you're seeing speeds of no more than 5 or 10 megabits per second. And there are big deserts of connectivity in Brooklyn and Queens. And if you live in a poor neighborhood, very likely that you have the worst speeds of all. Very tightly correlated. So we're leaving behind a whole generation of New York City public school kids. And it's disgraceful. So, compare that to your hometown of Cleveland, where in every public school, they're going to get fiber, and it's pretty tremendous. So, yeah, I'm sad about New York. Verizon is the largest employer in New York State, and Verizon has 200,000 employees. So it's a real political force in the city, and it's very difficult for the city to figure out how to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just, we think of the Bloomberg administration as sort of, he had the political will to take on fast food and drivers to a degree, but even with the internet issue in New York, he's pulling up short. And
well, I think this was a battle he did not want to take on. I mean, I'm on this committee, so I get to confront him directly about it, and it's not the thing he wants to do. So there you go.
Yeah,
it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate.
Do you think that the change in administration that we're heading towards is going to have a positive or negative impact? Do you think it'll matter?
It takes someone with the power that Bloomberg had to do something like this. So I don't know. I'm going to be optimistic, but I don't know what's going to happen in New York. It's a very difficult picture.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the biggest coming battles for net rights?
Well, I think this big untold story about the invisible squeezing going on at the edge of Comcast and Time Warner Cable networks, where they're making it difficult for people to connect with them, that's a huge battle, because that gives them control over everything coming over other networks. And it means that we're sort of recreating AOL, that you'll have a proprietary cableized walled garden for internet access, controlled absolutely by these companies who view themselves as editors. So there's a big fight over all that coming on. I think usage caps are going to be an enormous fight if you tried to switch all of your TV watching over to over-the-top viewing right now, you would be cutting into, the average American would be bumping up against usage caps, which would then drive even more Americans over to the video being sold by the cable guys because it'll feel too expensive to watch it online. So there are titanic fights coming in the next year or so over the power of the FCC, over the ability of cities to do this for themselves, and over the idea that everybody in America should have a very fast internet connection. Lots coming up.
I just want to see if we got any other questions from Catherine or Jamie.
Well, we did get one question from someone watching online, and it has to do with Aaron Swartz. And Susan, the filmmakers got one of the last interviews with Aaron, and some folks want to know what the implications of the prosecution of Aaron Swartz would be. And we know there's some legislation pending in Congress. What's your sense of that?
Oh, so you're talking about I couldn't quite hear you. You're talking about the proposed legislation about the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act?
Yeah. Proposed.
Oh, okay. As I understand it, the proposed legislation wouldn't actually have helped Aaron at the federal level. I don't know if there's something going on in Massachusetts that actually would have kept what he did from being perceived as a crime. I have also understood that there's some Congress people who are interested in saying even trying to set yourself up through a proxy server amounts to unauthorized access to a network. And if that's true, that would be really, really bad news for people who want to encrypt their traffic or not be, perfectly identifiable for the way that they travel across the internet. So, yeah, there's some bright developments, but a lot of darkness around the freedom of Americans to use the internet without being perfectly identified.
I think one of the major topics that's being discussed right now revolves around the leaks coming from Edward Snowden.
Yeah.
And do you think this gives less, I would say, comfort with the American people to allow, for instance, like the FCC to have more regulatory control if they are perceiving the government as spying on citizens?
Yeah, it's in fact that the Snowden revelations are not only a threat domestically to trusting government, but as a matter of our foreign policy around the world, we've been telling people for years that they should trust us and that an open internet is in everybody's best interest and is best for democracy, and that we shouldn't hand over control to the UN, and we should make sure that information flows as easily as possible. Now we look really hypocritical for making those arguments because they seem to be serving our interest in spying on everybody. And I know those arguments are made in good faith, that the people at the State Department arguing for an open internet are not thinking about simultaneously surveilling everybody. But it doesn't make for good policy appearance around the world. And it also doesn't make for good policy appearance domestically. So I'm deeply troubled about all this. I think that the FCC's role as a protector of consumers and information flow is still pretty clear. And I'm hopeful that that can be understood and embraced by the American people aside from their surveillance worry.
I know that there's been also, it seems like people are predicting pretty big, I think The Guardian was predicting pretty big implications for American cloud services as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, that at least seems like something that could get political attention in a way that maybe people shouting on an individual level won't. I don't
Yeah,
know.
maybe. I mean, it's interesting how these two things dovetail. We spent the first part of the call talking about inadequate access. Well, as a result, our cloud services aren't going to be that great because we're going to have first generation cloud companies, and so maybe all these other countries will develop their own cloud services. They won't need us anymore because of the inadequate access, and they'll be scared that we'll be snooping on them. So
yeah, it's sort of a double.
It's a double whammy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how's the movie doing? What's going on?
The movie's in post-production, so we
Good.
finished up a second round of interviews this summer, and we shot some footage in Arizona. As I said, on the Indian reservation, we've done a few little things here and there. We got to visit a cable manufacturing company that builds undersea cable and tour boat and stuff, which is cool. It was really cool. Pardon me. And then we're hoping to have a cut done this fall or early winter. I know that we're working very hard on that. It's a lot of information. We shot a lot of footage, but I'm optimistic. We have a pretty strong outline of what the film's going to look like, and now it's just a matter of plugging in the pieces and making sure everything looks beautiful and is compelling and is exciting. And I think, the help of folks like yourself, we got a lot of that really compelling, exciting footage, and all the details that America needs to know and doesn't know and isn't paying attention to. And so I'm really excited about the finished product coming together, and we'll certainly keep you posted and keep everyone posted about how that process is coming along.
And we're looking at most likely the spring to start looking at festival release. So that's so look out this coming spring for War for the Web.
Okay, great. I will. Thank you.
And we take the opportunity to let our viewers know that you can follow War for the Web on Twitter at War for the Web, and also Susan over at Susan at S Crawford. That's at S Crawford. And if you'd like to tweet about this event, use the hashtag #NetRights. And want to apologize about the very beginning of the broadcast. We're still trying to work out all the wrinkles on these Hangouts. This is our second one. So as we progress and build an audience, I'm sure they'll get a lot smoother. Oh, this is our third one, actually, right? No, this is our second one. Okay.
Sorry.
And we do have a third one, though, coming up in October, and let the filmmakers tell us about who the guest is going to be this time around, or next time around.
So,
Ben,
you want to? We've been talking a lot about installing fiber today. And so coming next month on October 24th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, our next Google Hangout will be joined by Srihari Pandit, the CEO and president of Stealth Communication, which is an independent ISP laying fiber here in Manhattan.
Right on.
And we'll be talking more about the need for fiber, especially here in New York.
And I think I'd like to ask him some questions too about the challenges he faces in building this network. We had the good fortune of tagging along with him while he installed some fiber under Madison Avenue in Midtown, and we've kept up with him as he's worked his way around the city. So it's exciting to talk to him about how things are progressing. He's a great guy.
Great.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again for taking the time to be with us tonight. It really
Thank you,
helped
Susan.
us out a lot, and we really appreciate it. And it was a great conversation.
Okay. Take care, guys.
Susan, thanks. And for any of you who are still watching, submit your questions for the next guest. Our next Google Hangout is in October, and we'll send you some more information on that. Anyway, thanks for joining us. Susan, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Anytime.
All right.